Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed our kickoff keynote. I know I did. So, to continue on with that, I would love to introduce Rami Ismail, who is with Flame Beer, business development, co-founder, prolific in the indie game development community. You can read all about him in his bio on the app, but I don't want to waste his time, so please welcome Rami.
Good morning. Hi. I'm still a little bit in Penny Arcade Expo recovery mode. I showcased my game for 4 days in a row, and I was behind Rock Band, which means that I had to shout over a lot of Iron Maiden songs. So if my voice gives a little bit, or I sound a bit like I've just interacted with 30,000 people a day that might or might not wash their hands, that is exactly what happened. So I want to talk today about how to not be bad at doing good, and I have to prefix that with that I am not 100% sure at how to do that. Alternatively, I thought of calling this talk "How to Deal with Leadership Roles in a Globally Connected World," but this sounded a lot more honest to me, so I'm going to go with this one. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rami Ismail. I am one half of a Dutch independent studio named Vlaambeer. At Vlaambeer, I do the business and I do the development, which means that I program the games and then try to somehow make money with those games and keep the studio afloat. We are best known for games like Super Crate Box, which is a game about collecting crates with guns, Ridiculous Fishing, which is a game about fishing with guns, Luftrausers, which is a game about airplanes with guns, and Nuclear Throne, which is a game about mutants with guns. We do like guns. We're probably best known for our screen shake. I only shot a gun once in my life, and it was way too big, and I fell because it turns out that recoil on weapons is kind of big. On the side, or personally, or backed by my studio, I also created a lot of smaller things, mostly tools for other independent developers. The one I'm best known for is probably Do Press Kit, which helps independent developers create press kits for their games so that they can get the word out. Do Distribute, which helps them after they made a press kit and the press is interested to distribute their builds to the press. Do Toolkit, which honestly is just a website on which you can find Do Press Kit and Do Distribute and Do Contract, which is a tool that another person made. And I've recently been working on something called Game Dev World, which is a website that aims to bring together a lot of knowledge about game development and then make it available in every major language in the world, including Portuguese, Spanish, Arabic, Chinese, and Russian. I have been called many things since I started. I mean, at first I was half of Vlaambeer, or that bearded dude, or the guy that travels too much. Then people started calling me things like this. And I didn't call myself stuff like that. I was actually terrified when people started calling me things like that because it sounded very mature and adult. And I am a university dropout that started a company of which the logo is literally a bear on fire, and the name is a bad pun that means bear on fire in Dutch. I've also been called less flattering things, which is also very interesting. Somebody once called me a personal cult leader, which I thought was a very interesting one. But thought leader, spokesperson, ambassador, advocate, all of those things sound weird to me. They sounded weird to me. And I never thought of myself as a leader. I never thought as somebody that could have leadership qualities. First, I didn't believe I could be. And then later on, I just sort of rejected it and decided I wanted to make games. And then I realized that mostly I just didn't want the responsibility, because being a leader means that people might follow or listen, and that means I had to be careful with the things I said and did. I was worried that I was messed up, that I was going to mess up, that I was going to mess everything up, that somehow this was a really quick way to making sure that everybody knew that I was a total fraud, and everybody was going to find out, and everything would be terrible. And at some point, I realized that messing up could be a positive part of it and a way to learn. And I realized that people were looking at what I was saying, whether I wanted it or not, whether I liked it or not. Every day, my Twitter kept growing, my Facebook friends list kept growing. People kept inviting me to talks and come stand on stages and talk to you about things that I was thinking about. And I started to realize that it was useful to bring to light issues that I thought were troublesome or things that I wanted to fix in the industry. So I decided to try and do good, right? I decided to go and use my visibility to talk about the games that I liked, that I thought were interesting, that nobody was talking about, to promote people's work or opinions or articles or their voices, if I thought they added something to the ecosystem, or to in some cases share my opinion or share solutions or share problems that I, thought were worth looking at. And it turns out I sucked at doing good. I was really bad at it because I was only considering my own stance and opinion, and I was only considering my personal situation. And I was really only discussing the industry that I knew. I used to say things, I used to get on stage and say things like, games should be games again, and focus purely on the gameplay because I felt that was true. But I said it as a complete absolute. I said, this is the only way games should be. Games should be games again. Games should focus on gameplay. All of this stuff with narrative games, what are we doing? Let's make a game about collecting crates and shooting guns. I'm pretty embarrassed of that now. But that was a thing that I would used to say, and I was only considering my personal situation. I was talking about life as I knew it, and I grew up in the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, if you tell somebody, you should go indie even if you have no money, that's a great idea. We are a socialized country. Most Americans would call us almost communist. Our extreme right party is all for just national health care that is free. And our education, at worst, costs like $7,000. That's pretty much the highest student loan you can have is $7,000. In those circumstances, it's a pretty good idea to just drop everything and go indie. But if I tell people to go indie in that way here, they might be stuck with what? What is a good student loan here? Like a few $100,000? Probably not as good in advice. And I was only discussing the industry that I knew. I'm an independent developer. I basically started a company with noodles, and then I started to make money doing that, and I started to make games, and people started to listen to me. And I would discuss the industry from that point of view. So I would tell people to be as personal as possible, say what they were thinking. There was a dude who did that last 2 weeks ago at Nintendo, and he got fired, because apparently that's not a good idea if you're not in my segment of the industry. But I never thought about that. I never thought about that until suddenly there was repercussions for my words. Suddenly people were pushing back, and suddenly people were telling me that I was an asshole. And honestly, they were probably right. So I dropped out of school. I mentioned that. But that doesn't mean that I don't think teachers have... I do think that teachers have taught me stuff. It's not as if I never learned anything from a teacher. I didn't like the school that I was at, that's for sure, or I wouldn't have dropped out. But it was actually after I dropped out that a teacher taught me something really, really valuable. And it was when I was visiting an event in Johannesburg, Amaze Johannesburg. Incidentally, I have to be at the same event in 6 days. And in the meanwhile, I have to go to Argentina and Helsinki. I made really bad planning choices. Anyway, Johannesburg. I was going to be in Johannesburg, and there's a teacher there by the name of Hanli Geiser, or Hanli Geiser, depending on English or Dutch pronunciation. Anyway, I had a talk in South Africa, in Johannesburg, and she asked me to talk to the students, just a Q&A. And one of the students had heard of our story and asked me, how important do you think school was to your success? And I gave them the answer that I thought was the good answer, which is I don't think school is all that important in a creative field. It's a creative field. It's hard to teach you creativity. It's hard to teach you how to make games right. Your teachers are probably have made more mistakes than you have, so they're probably smarter than you at doing this specific thing. But if you want to do your own thing, go for it. Like, don't let education hold you down. One of the quotes that I kept using was, never let school get in the way of your education, which I thought was a pretty brilliant quote. And then after that, during that Q&A, that teacher walked out of my talk. And okay, she's a teacher, so, fair play. But then afterwards, she grabbed me, and she told me that if I ever pulled something like that again, she would just never invite me back, and she would tell the students to never listen to an idiot like me again. And I thought that was pretty harsh. Like, okay, you're a teacher, me telling students that your job, is... Sure, you can be upset about that, but this was pretty harsh, I felt. And then she told me, it's really, really simple. These kids are in a school in Johannesburg. If they drop out, if they fail school, there are no other opportunities. There's not a single other opportunity for an uneducated person in Johannesburg to earn money. You go into drugs, you go into shoe polishing, you go into crime, something like that. Johannesburg is not the nicest place. I'd never thought of that. I just gave a bunch of game developers the answer that I thought was right. Turned out that those game developers are not the same as me. They're different. They have different contexts. They have a different life. And I was trying to do good. And here I literally told a bunch of kids to potentially throw away their life and go and sell drugs on the streets of Johannesburg. Yeah, oops. So I went back to the students and told them that I was an idiot and to please not listen to me. But what we need to realize is that this medium at this point has an enormous reach. It's ridiculous. It's what is it nowadays? How many dollars are in this industry? Hundreds of, like 100 billion almost? We're getting close to 100 billion. Games are being played everywhere. I remember being a kid, young kid, I'm half Egyptian, being in Egypt, playing games that we would buy in the store, but they would be illegal copies because the original copies are too expensive for an Egyptian. So what they would do is they would scan the front of a CD box and then reprint it, but the CDs came in a box like that, and they reprinted it for normal jewel cases, so it'd be squashed. And then on the back would be a serial key, and it would just say 00000000000, and you paid money for that. You paid money for an illegal copy of the game. That was when I was a kid. Nowadays, gaming in Egypt is huge. It's an enormous thing. Everybody either has a gaming PC or a console. In Africa, people mostly skipped the computer age. They just went straight to smartphones. If you want to sell games in Africa, you focus on smartphones because nobody has a PC. In Asia, you've got way more net cafes than we have here. Like, there's different ways of playing games everywhere. There's different contexts for playing games everywhere. There's different contexts for making games everywhere as well. Because now that games are everywhere, you notice that game development is everywhere as well. And game development obviously is very different depending on the context of a place, depending on the economy. Is it easy to get access to English education? Because our industry, the reason I'm doing GameDev.world, most of the information about game development is in English. I once tried to explain to my dad, who is very Egyptian, what programming was. And I tried for hours and hours and hours, and my dad is a smart guy. Smart guy. Moved to the Netherlands from Egypt, taught himself Dutch, now teaches Dutch to people moving to the Netherlands. You have to be pretty smart to do that. And I tried to explain it, and it just wouldn't work. And I got frustrated, and I walked out of it. Until a year ago, a New York designer by the name of Rami Ismail made a programming language that is Arabic. You write it in Arabic. And I showed it to my dad, and he went like, oh, if you had told me that, I would have gotten it right away. But that's an invisible obstacle that we never have to think about, because I am talking to you right now. I hope you all speak English, otherwise I'm sorry. Although you wouldn't be able to understand that I said so. Never mind. But access to information, access to knowledge, access to economy is very different all over the world. And it's so easy to think that we are doing a good job as leaders, that we are doing a good job in spreading information about the industry, about being good ambassadors, advocates, examples, leaders. I don't care what the world is. We're not. We're not. The reality is we're never. This is E3. I've been giving talks about Arabic in games for what, a year and a half now, continuously at every major event. This is Call of Duty, the new one, Black Ops 3. Now that's cool. Those letters should be not there, but whatever. The letters that I want to point you at are those. Those are not Arabic. It looks like Arabic, but it's written the wrong way around. Because we don't write Arabic from left to right. And we don't write Arabic without connecting letters. In fact, that has nothing to do with Arabic. In fact, this is so common in the games industry that the same guy that made that Arabic programming language keeps a blog at nopenotarabik.tumblr.com of examples of this. So there are obvious problems everywhere. We have obvious examples with harassment, campaigns, sexism, racism, cultural representation, stuff like this, toxicity in our comments. There's so much left to do. There's so many problems left to solve. And being visible on a global scale to all sorts of people is an impossible responsibility. You can't get all of it right. There's no way to get all of it right. And on top of that, it's not always possible to choose whether you want a leadership role. Sometimes somebody just drops you in there. Now all of a sudden, people look to you for advice, for questions, for answers. But you do kind of have a choice, right? If you suddenly become a leadership figure on Twitter, you can turn your Twitter private or something. Like, it's a stretch, it's a total stretch. But there is a tiny bit of a choice there still. And since there is even that tiniest sliver of a choice, there's also a responsibility. You also have to hold yourself accountable for what you do with that position. And your words and your actions and the things you say, the things you make, as soon as you get thrown into a spotlight, as soon as you get a position in which people look to you, they become larger than just the things you mean. They become larger than just the things you say. They can take on meanings, they can have effects and consequences that you had never thought about. And just like in South Africa, our words and actions can impact people far beyond the world we understand. To give you another example, there's a really good friend of mine who made a really good game. That's as far as I want to identify this person. And it's a he. So that's like, because otherwise the next part is going to be hard to explain. He once gave a talk at GDC. And he gave a talk at GDC about a game that he made. And he's kind of an interesting one when it comes to public speaking because he likes to joke. And he likes to give pretty sarcastic talks. And he gave a talk on the games industry. And he gave a talk on running a business. And that talk at GDC, as every talk at GDC, got archived. And it got archived on the GDC vault. Now, I was visiting an emergent territory, right? A place where the games industry is just growing, usually a place with not too great access to tools or language, the English language in specific. And I went there, and I came across this little company that had a really, really cool game. But their company structure was absolutely absurd. Everything they were doing in terms of press and in terms of how to run the company was the worst idea that I had ever heard. And I asked them, why are you doing things that way? They responded, we watched the talk on the GDC Vault. And the person giving that talk was a really smart guy that has made a really good game, so we just listened to him. But he wasn't serious. He was making a joke. He was being sarcastic. But it didn't translate across the language barrier. And is that his fault? I don't know. Is it? Is that something he could have prevented? I don't know. Is it something we should consider? Yes, absolutely. Is it something you can always prevent? No, probably not. But if you keep it in mind, it's going to be easier. So, what I'm trying to say is we can choose to be a force for good, but we will fail. We will fail. We will always fail. No matter what you try to do, no matter how well you try to do it, you will always fail. And that is okay. I need everybody to understand that that is always okay. It is okay to fail, as long as we realize that failure is okay, as long as part of the solution is communicating that you failed and explaining why you failed to everybody that is following you, to everybody that looks up to you. To make sure that our communication about what we did wrong is as loud as the mistake we made, which is hard, because it means you'll have to apologize a lot of times, because believe me, a mistake travels really far, really fast on the internet. Also, what I'm trying to say is don't waste people's time, right? Because it's the golden design rule. Don't waste people's time. But a lot of people have given you their time and their trust. And the more people do that, the harder it is to not waste it, because it's more. On the other side, it means you reach more people, so it's easier to not waste it by doing good, right? But doing that requires more than broadcasting, it requires more than talking, it requires listening. It requires acting as a conduit for people that do not have the platform that you have. It means amplifying voices that do not have the platform that you have. Leadership, I feel, should always, even though we always think of it the other way, leadership should always be a humble task. It's a humble task. It's not leading by standing on top of something. It's leading by being part of something, helping push, and figuring out how to fix problems for everybody. So I really quickly just want to go through 5 things I learned that I think were valuable over the last 5 years. Vlaanderen turned 5 years yesterday, by the way. That was our birthday. That was cool. Thank you. But not the obvious things, right? Not be kind or be respectful or don't be an asshole. 5 things I learned that are interesting. Absolutes are bad. This is an absolute. It is bad. There are a few exceptions, but very few things in this industry are absolute. Very few things in life are absolute. We like to think of them as absolute because we've never seen something that is an exception from that absolute. The reality is, it's probably not absolute, right? When me and my partner travel, she is a white American and I am an Arab. Whenever we travel, I will get more random checks than her. This sounds like an absolute. Even in the Arab world, because my name happens to be the same as a pretty notorious Arab drug dealer, I get more random checks. We flew to Russia. Turns out Russia at the moment doesn't really like Americans politically. I did not get random checked. She did. Not an absolute, even though forever, up until this point, it felt like an absolute. We have to acknowledge that. Very few things are absolute. So use I think or I feel or I believe for anything that isn't an objective, provable truth. And realize that there are very few objective, provable truths when it comes to video games. And also, a word that a lot of people use as shorthand is you. Now, you is a terrible word to use in pretty much any form of communication because you assumes a lot of things about who that you is. It sounds like a very easy word to use and not get wrong, but as soon as you say anything about you or you imply anything about you, there's a 99.9% chance that you're going to get it wrong for at least one person that reads that article, and that's kind of a shitty thing to do. Listen, but avoid others having to do your job for you. It's really easy to be like, okay, you know what? I'm just going to throw this thing out there, and if I fucked up, people are going to tell me. And then I'm just going to ask them why I fucked up. That's a really good way of wasting people's time, and it's a really good way of wasting people's time for a fuck up that you could have avoided. Don't do that. If you mess up and you genuinely had no way to weigh that you messed up, or you just didn't know that you were going to mess up, that is fine. If you are unsure, check. Just check. It's really easy. We've got Google nowadays. It's a pretty cool website. If you have a question, you just enter it, and then it gives you an answer. I had a thing a while ago where I'm not a native English speaker, right? So I was trying to write a tweet about transgender people. And I did not know if in English the preferred terminology would be a transgender or a transgender person. So I Googled it. Took me all of 5 seconds to Google it, and then all of 10 minutes to just read a bunch of articles about it and figure out which one I thought was the better choice based on what those people said. And then after that, I asked a bunch of people that I knew, reached out to a bunch of people that speak about those things a lot, and learned why that was correct or incorrect. And when you face criticism for something you say, you could just default to listen. Just listen. You don't have to agree. You can disagree. You can be upset internally. You can think life's unfair for somebody calling you out on Twitter. I don't care. Just shut up, listen. Okay? Doesn't mean you have to accept it as gospel or truth. Just know that additional viewpoint exists. That is all. It's very simple to just go, to go and be defensive. You don't have to be. Just listen. And again, the main point of this slide is don't be that person that expects other people to explain to you why you are wrong. People will just tell you you're wrong. The people that are going to tell you you're wrong are people that deal with people that are wrong about things that are important to them all the time. They're tired of your shit. Don't make them explain it to you. Don't be that person. So, one of the biggest lessons you learn in a lot of video games / movie schools is show, don't tell. I think that's nonsense. Please show and tell. As a leader, show and tell is a lot more effective. Nudge and tell, do and tell. People always tell you actions speak louder than words. I think actions without words create a terrible context for whatever you're doing. Tell people why you're doing things. Explain it to them. Create a context of who you are, why you're doing things, why you think those are important. And it doesn't mean the other things aren't extremely effective. When I thought indies needed to be better at communicating to press, I made press kit. And when I thought indies were really bad at condensing their pitch down to just a single paragraph, I just made it so that press kit doesn't accept more than a paragraph for the description of your game. Now I get bug reports every week of indies that tell me that they want to enter more than one paragraph, and I just ignore them, and then 3 weeks later I check their press kit and there's just one paragraph, because otherwise it just won't work. That's a nudge. But I also wrote a big blog post about why that nudge is there, and I point them to that when they email me. I also did a thing on Twitter a few weeks ago where I just posted, please send something positive to somebody that inspired you. It was very simple. It made my timeline really nice for a few hours. But I made clear why I did that. Because I want Twitter to feel more positive. I want it to feel less scary. This won't fix that, but it's a little push. It's a little, hey, let's try and do this. And if you speak out against problematic stuff from a leadership position, make sure you articulate why. Articulate that this is why you're doing that, and make sure that the people that follow you realize why you're doing that. Because one of the things that is really, really important is that you have to be accountable for the effects of your actions. And that also means that if you call somebody out, even if it's for the right reasons, doesn't mean the people that listen to you will act on that in a way that is proper. When you call somebody out for something, chances are that a lot of people on your Twitter, on your social media, wherever, whether you do it in the press, whether you do it in a video, whether you do it on Twitter, they're going to just jump on that person and tell them they are a terrible person for the reasons that you mentioned. Because people believe you, right? Because people listen to you. At that point, you're basically enabling harassment. Even though it is against a person that did something wrong, even though it is against a person that said something terrible, like, part of this whole thing is that we have to make sure that things are good. And we can do that by explaining to people why other things are bad, but we can't do that by just doing the same thing in the other direction, right? So be thoughtful about that kind of stuff. Sometimes like a nuclear option is an option that you can take, but you have to be very, very aware of that, and you have to be accountable for when that happens. And also consider that for every issue you speak about, you're not talking about another issue. And that sounds a bit weird because we can't talk about everything at once, but there's one specific example that always breaks my heart. And it is, I went to an emergent territory, and I talked to them about diversity. And they said, that isn't for us. And I asked them, why not? They said, because diversity is about women in Western countries. And it took me a moment, and then I realized what they meant. A, they don't have 100% grasp of the English language. Then B, when we speak about diversity, very often at the moment, what we're talking about is gender diversity. That's good, okay? Let's get that out of the way. It's good that we are talking about that. There's also racial diversity, which we're also talking about. There are all sorts of types of diversity that we're all talking about. But the people out there did not feel that the word diversity, such a powerful and important word, applied to them. Because nobody had ever mentioned them. Nobody had ever talked about them. Nobody had ever talked about them in the context of the word diversity. So it was not for them. We have to be thoughtful of that too. For every issue we talk about, we're not talking about another. And sometimes it's good to just poke at this little other issue, right? This issue that people are not talking about. Make sure that people know it exists. You have to accept that you're always on the record. I did a really fun talk at Develop Conference a few weeks ago, and one of the slides that I had said, fuck, between parentheses, customers. A certain group that pretends to be for ethics in video games didn't like my slide, and they got really mad at me. I knew they would, so I had a slide before my presentation telling the audience that that would probably happen, and that was kind of one of the points of my talk. But you are always on the record. If it can be screenshotted, if it can be photographed, if it can be videotaped, if it can be recorded, if it can be quoted, if it can be quoted out of context, chances are it will be. That's the way this works. You get a spotlight on you, that's the way it's going to work. People can make up stuff about you. They can literally Photoshop a tweet, and it will spread as truth, even though it would take, 0.1 0.3 seconds to just enter the text into Google and figure out it's false? Why do you think your Facebook is full of those photos that are said to be one thing but actually turned out to be another thing from 12 years ago? It's because people are really easy to just assume something on the internet is true. You do too. I do too. It's the way we work. We see something, it's an image, it has a text above it, cool, it must be true. What was the meme? Abraham Lincoln said, don't believe everything you read on the internet. So all of those things don't mean that you have to hide yourself. You be you, right? I am terrible. If you check my Twitter yesterday, it's just photos from my dinner date with my girlfriend. I talk continuously about, I have to respond continuously is the better way of phrasing it, about being a Muslim in the games industry, because people are very confused as to how that is possible. It got so silly that I made a website called didramigetrandomchecked.com, where you can check how often I get random checked on my flights. It is about 1 in 5 flights, in case you're wondering. The average person gets 1 in 50. Cool. The worst thing is that it's random, so I can't even say that it's a problem because it might just be random. Except for that one time the security guy told me that it was because I looked Arab. That's not funny. Not funny at all. It's funny at first, and then you think about it. It's like never mind. I have 2 minutes. Shall I tell a dumb tangent, like a weird tangent story? I'll do a weird tangent story. I was once in an airplane. It was Ramadan, and during Ramadan you cannot eat or drink during day, right? While the sun is up, you cannot eat and drink. Now, nowadays we have the internet, which is cool because it means that if I enter my location, I get a timer that tells me when I can eat again. One day, I was flying and I was in an airplane and I opened my laptop to check what I could eat. Then I realized that I was now an Arab bearded dude in an airplane with a big countdown timer in Arabic on my laptop screen. And then I closed my laptop and I was really scared for the next 20 minutes of my flight. Nobody arrested me, I was not shot, I'm still here. But that's terrifying. That's a reality that probably none of you have ever had to think about. And now every time I'm on an airplane, I'm scared of opening countdown timers. That's messed up. Anyway, the world is different for all sorts of people. Just keep that in mind. Where was I? Yeah. So, if you feel that you, as you exist, do not fit within the things I just said, where you can be accountable for what you say, where you can be screenshotted or photographed or videotaped or whatever, doesn't necessarily mean you are a terrible person. Okay? It means that you need to think about and find ways to communicate about the issues that you care about in a way that is acceptable, in a way that is good, in a way that is positive, in a way that helps, that is constructive, okay? You might also need to work on yourself if the reason that you can't be within those reasons is because you are some sort of misogynist asshole, then probably work on yourself. This industry can always be more than it is. We are never there. Whatever issue we fix today, there's a new issue we should fix tomorrow. There's a new issue that we should have been fixing days ago. And sometimes solving an issue creates a new issue. You remember, I don't know if you remember, I remember a time in which the biggest issue for an indie game was getting noticed between the AAA games. We solved that issue. Now the problem is that indie games have gotten so good at getting attention that it's really hard to make an indie game that gets attention because the other indie games are so good at getting attention. So we solved that problem and we created the next problem, and now we need to fix that. For every territory that becomes accessible, that becomes accessible to the market, for every territory that gets access to our industry, we have new problems to solve because those territories are different. They have different challenges, they have different things we need to work on. There's a new one that can grow. There's a new territory that we can look at. So we need to focus on encouraging. We need to focus on acknowledging different types of people. We need to focus on informing people. We need to focus on empowering people. And that way, the industry can keep becoming more than it is. Thank you. Was that within the 2 minutes I still had?
What's that?
Was that within the 2 minutes I still had?